Good evening, everybody, and good morning to Gihan. We have an exciting speaker today, Gihan Amarasiriwardena. I'll talk to you a little bit about him today. But firstly, just to thank all the people who are putting this together. Hatch, which is a place for innovation, growth, and collaboration. It's the center of gravity for all things startup in Sri Lanka, and now hopefully in Pakistan by the end of this year. And also BYLC Ventures, which was created to help passionate young founders get kickstart their big ideas. And they provide technical support to validate product solutions and also help them mentor through their projects. Seed Ventures, Pakistan's the biggest social entrepreneurship and equity development organization, works to support and promote entrepreneurship across various landscapes and verticals. They work extensively with micro enterprises, small and medium enterprises, startups, universities, and school children. And finally, ProPakistani, which is Pakistan's independent publisher for tech, business, and other news, which has a following of almost 140 million people to its sites. So just a little intro about Gihan Amarasiriwardena. He's well known for various things, but Gihan is the co-founder and president of Ministry of Supply, an apparel brand dedicated to making clothing scientifically better through innovative design, cutting-edge manufacturing, and new materials. Gihan is a graduate of MIT's chemical engineering program and a Tinkler at heart. Gihan leads design, R&D, and product development at Ministry of Supply and brings his engineering mindset to solving common wardrobe problems. Over the past few years, he has consistently put his designs to extreme tests. In 2015, he set the Guinness World Record for fastest half marathon in a suit. And in 2018, he cycled across America wearing Ministry of Supply NASA-derived polo design. He was named as Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2015. And Ministry of Supply has been named to Fast Company's Most Innovative Companies list in 2021 and winners of their Innovation Design Awards in 2018 and 2020. He also has several patents under his name. And he's from this region. So Gihan, welcome to Hatch Global, which is a talk show we have every week with entrepreneurs all around the region. And they are waiting for inspiration from you today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And it's very rare that I have my name pronounced correctly when I'm introduced. So it's fun.
Gihan's at the moment in Boston, and Gihan, you love running.
Yep.
I remember you sharing that the ballet shoe that you made right at the beginning because it was too comfortable. Tell us why you wanted to do it first of all, and how you did it.
Yeah. I grew up as a Boy Scout here in the U.S. and went camping every month and just fell in love with performance materials. So whether it's a winter camping trip when it's snowing out or a summer bike ride, was just exposed to how there'd been this massive shift in performance materials as I was growing up in the kind of late '90s and early 2000s. Seeing Under Armour and Nike Dri Fit come along, that there was this big shift from cotton to performance materials. And I started making my own outdoor gear like when I was in middle school and high school, and that's kind of where the passion started. Sewing rain jackets, sleeping bags. I was a cross country athlete and track athlete, so I also tried to make even lighter shoes, essentially in a time before Flyknit, for example, making shoes out of a laminate material, and doing this all at home. And it was a way to kind of discover materials, but also product design and how that could really impact performance. But yeah, that passion kind of extended, I think, for me. Coming to Boston, it's a different environment. It's an urban environment where you need a different type of performance. In particular, for me, it was the bike ride commute. That was the ultimate test of wanting to look sharp in a professional setting, but at the same time, not sweating through my shirt and feeling uncomfortable. And I was fortunate to meet my co-founders at MIT too, where we were, all of our friends were hacking code, we like to say, and we were both hacking clothes. Aman, my co-founder, was actually taking Nike Dri Fit socks, cutting the bottoms of them, sewing to gold toe dress socks, and making these performance dress socks. He was a former consultant too, so it was something where this shared passion for creating our products were really what inspired this. So yeah, we launched in 2012 and actually launched on Kickstarter with a dress shirt that has NASA phase change materials in it, absorbs heat when you're too hot, releases it back to you when you're cold. And yeah, we set the record on Kickstarter for most funded fashion project, and that was really the start of the brand.
And did you know when you right at that age that you wanted to be in clothing and you wanted to be, you did a chemical and a biological degree at MIT, but did you really know that you wanted to get into retail and how complicated retail would be?
I didn't know how complicated retail was, but I think there's a little bit of clothing is in the blood. My grandmother is from Padaka in Sri Lanka, and she had a textile mill in basically the backyard, which they were weaving blankets at the time. And so my parents came to the U.S. as chemists for grad school, and so you can kind of say like the two merged together of the innovative materials, and so I've been exposed to it in kind of in the periphery, but certainly didn't. The goal for life was really to kind of start a performance materials company, and it's certainly kind of evolved into this. But I think we realized that the application of materials is really in final consumer goods products, and that's where kind of the innovation happens. So yeah.
And then what made you run a half marathon in a suit? I mean, we have Richard Branson doing crazy stuff with his brand, and you're up there doing crazy stuff with your clothes. So what made you do that?
Yeah. We had launched our first. We'd started with dress shirts initially, and we were launching our first blazer and suit, and we really wanted to kind of test our garment at the extremes. And we have this belief that like if our products work at kind of the edge cases, that they'll work in everyday life. And so it was a way to kind of show that you could have a garment that looked sharp, that had great four-way stretch, moisture management, and that when you cross the finish line, I think a lot of people asked if that picture was from before the start of the race, but it was absolutely from afterwards. And the reason is it's because the garment works and it maintains its shape, maintains its stretch, but doesn't hold you back. And so I set the record for men, and my wife actually did it again for a women's suit a few years later. But I ran it in December, which is quite cold here in Boston, but then she ran it in May, where it was very warm and hot and humid. So yeah, she had it much harder.
And then you did another crazy thing, which is very similar to something I've done, which is crazy, which is walk across the country, but you rode across the country, and that was also to look at your biking stuff, and that would have been a different type of journey, right? It would have been, how many days did it take, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah. It was it took 38 days, just about 5 weeks to go from Boston to San Francisco. And I think what's one of the amazing things just from a product development standpoint is you're just exposed to such a wide array of environments, from, the hot, humid East Coast, the Appalachian Mountains, to super windy, hot, plains of the US, and then, climbing to altitude at 10,000, 12,000 feet, right? And realizing how much, again, like, clothing makes such a big difference on your performance. So, going through the desert and having, starting the day at, -0 Celsius because it's so cold, and then it climbs to 100 plus in the daytime. Like, seeing those temperature swings was a extreme test for our garments. I biked in one of our modified polos that we turned into basically like a bike jersey, and I wore and washed it every night, and then it stood the test. I will say the one thing that it did show that it had been out there for a long time was there's a little bit of fading on the back of the jersey because it's just blasted by the sun for over a month in the hot summer. So yeah.
That's amazing. It's an amazing story, and something that your grandkids love to hear as well.
Yeah.
I've heard that you say this a couple of times, that clothing is an extension of your body, and form and function of clothing. How do you really bring it together? Because a lot of people don't understand that clothing can play a different role, and it really is an extension of your body. And how do you, from a design thinking point of view, bring that together?
Yeah, I spent some time at the Sports Technology Institute in the UK, where a lot of advanced research for like Lululemon, New Balance, and other kind of UK sport was done, and had the opportunity to work with some elite athletes, but really kind of see how we could design gear, whether it's footwear or jerseys, for example, to allow them to perform at a world-class level. And that was a really interesting opportunity to see how material science, kind of mechanical engineering, product design, and working with world-class athletes, you could create this product. And similarly spent some time at IDEO for an internship and learned the human-centered design process, which is common in kind of industrial design of hard goods, but is actually not as commonly used in the fashion industry. We typically think of fashion as kind of this kind of aesthetic that changes over time, but really it's about how do we track the needs of people as culture shifts, right? And I think right now what we're learning is there's this huge opportunity as people's workday changes, right? Like it used to be very rigid and defined as a time and a place, right? But now work has extended to kind of anywhere and anytime, right? And how do these clothes work with that? So using this kind of human-centered design process, we design our clothes and first through like an interview process, essentially doing these one-to-one interviews with customers to understand what does their day look like, identifying these moments where there's discomfort or an opportunity to improve the product. And then we look at our technical toolkit. What are the materials that we have? What are some features that we can develop into our products? And like, what are novel manufacturing techniques that we could use to achieve that? And so it's really that kind of push and pull that happens between the consumer and the technology and materials that we have. It's not a linear process. We think of ourselves more like a software development company. We run on Agile and Scrum, which is what you'll find in a lot of software development companies. Not novel by any means, but certainly a new practice in the fashion and apparel industry, which is doing these small iterative cycles and really getting real-time feedback from customers.
And the center you're talking about is Loughborough University, which is renowned for sports and biomechanics as well. Just related to that, you're still very connected to research institutes, and you do work with MIT very regularly. How important is that for your business, and how important would you say for anyone who wants to get into this type of business to stay connected with science?
Yeah, I think it's keep one foot in academia, one foot in industry, in the like manufacturing space, and another another arm in the consumer lens, right? Which is like understand what's coming out of the labs, and a lot of times the lab research is intentionally undirected, right? And then we've got a sense of kind of what are consumers saying, what are challenges they're facing, and in this collaboration, we can actually guide the research towards solving a problem. And another part is that we realize that we can't do the innovation alone. We are very much tied to our manufacturers, and they make both intense capital investments in terms of manufacturing equipment, but also they're thinking, across the industry, like what are multiple applications across a couple different categories that we can improve these materials and products around. So I think we spend a ton of time at our factories just seeing what they're working on, what's coming down, and that's where you can say, hey, there's a new material or a manufacturing technique that's being used for a different process, but how can we apply it here? And a great example of that is we launched about 3 years ago our Mercury Intelligent Heated Jacket, our first foray into wearable devices. And our perspective with wearables is we don't want it to be purely for the sake of sensing and biometrics. We want to use wearable technology to actually improve the performance of the garment. So if you wear a jacket, it's to keep you warm, but at the right level of warmth and not too hot. So, and a lot of this was learning like what are the spare parts coming out of the cell phone industry, like the mobile technology, like accelerometers became dirt cheap, all of a sudden. What we ended up figuring out is actually the best way to predict someone's, metabolic rate or kind of their temperature is not a temperature sensor, but it's actually their acceleration. What's their activity level? And so we've developed an algorithm in our heated jacket, for example, that is based on that. And so I think it's the best way to kind of keep is just see this there's this idea of like spare parts, like what are the spare parts from other industries, and what's kind of the exhaust coming out of the labs, you know, in academia, and try to put the pieces together.
And how do you sort of collaborate with companies? I mean, a lot of companies in Asia are very nervous to share their ideas and collaborate and open innovation. How do you collaborate and be open to sort of taking ideas from outside and also sharing your ideas and be comfortable in that zone of doing it?
Yeah, you know, it's I think in part because we're in the fashion industry where largely like IP is overlooked, that you know, we've learned that it's just better to be open and transparent, and actually like our kind of brand positioning is that we bring technology and innovation both to life in a physical product, but we also try to make it easy to understand for consumers. And we like to think of ourselves more like a middle school science show in some ways, where it's like, how can we make the science fun and interesting, that and the technology that we're making, so that like I think there's tremendous value in building a brand where you're actually inviting people to be part of that innovation process, to understand it, because you know, you may have a novel technology that you have IP and kind of you know, a stake in the ground on, but if you don't get consumers excited about it and customers, you know, to see the real world applications, it's never going to get that groundswell that you need. In terms of collaborations, I think what we found is the best collaborations are when two brands or kind of experiences come together, where we actually take what we both do best, but in the mixing process, for example, we come out with something that's novel. That's usually where like the best collaborations have been. I will say actually, like one of the best ones is we were actually developing this shape change material with this MIT self-assembly lab for about 2 years, and then COVID happened. Right, we were developing a ton of expertise and testing capabilities around computerized knitting, and in you know, week 2 of the pandemic, it was, you know, the second week of March, basically, our lab said, hey, let's actually shift our mindset, our manufacturing, our laboratory, and MOS as a brand from a like design and testing perspective, and focus on mass production. And while masks are certainly now something that's, you know, common and probably having, you know, maybe less needed as vaccinations go up, we were able to design, develop, test, and get a Nelson Labs tested, you know, filter media in these masks in the course of 10 days. And we produced, you know, over 70,000 of these that we were able to provide to healthcare providers across the country. So that's something where I think sometimes the innovation, we thought the application initially was going to be this consumer facing like shape change material product, but the real value was testing the supply chain and innovation pipeline that could react and respond and create a mask in 10 days when the world needed it most. And we actually partnered with MAS in Sri Lanka to do the production.
Great. Those of you listening in, please do drop in any questions into the chat box, or if you're listening in on Facebook or YouTube, please do put your questions in. It'll come to Gihan right at the end. So Gihan, one of the best, most interesting projects, and you talked about collaboration, and there's this fight to get to space first, and it looks like Jeff Bezos is leading that at the moment. And you got there 3 years before by creating well, how was it working with MIT, NASA, and yourself? I mean, you're a smaller retail brand now. You're working with one of the best universities in the world, and working with one of the best space research organizations globally. How do you sort of plug yourself into that space, and how do you share your knowledge and receive a lot more knowledge as well?
Yeah, I think it's like, you know, how can collaborators like find what's the X factor that they bring to a collaboration? I think, you know, for NASA, it's space grade tested innovation, right, and an immense investment in technologies that are designed for human space flight. But the ultimate goal for NASA, for example, is that investment will trickle down into the American, the global economy, right? And so that kind of idea there is they're very interested in figuring out how can there be industrial and consumer applications of the technology. And so as a brand, and as a brand that's built its positioning around making innovative materials consumer friendly and applying them in products where they actually make a difference in the day-to-day commute of a person, right? Like making a hot summer commute cooler when you're in the subway, and when you get into the over AC'd office that you're not freezing. Turns out that's the same challenge an astronaut's having when they go from the sun on one side of the space station to shadows on the other side. That those are the same challenges, again, testing at the extremes and then applying it to the real world, right? So that was one reason that NASA's been really excited to collaborate with us, and it's likewise with MIT. A lot of the research they're focusing on is looking at like very far out, 5-10 years down the line, but it excites professors, researchers to see their ultimate motivation is to discover new technology, but then also to see it come to life in the real world. And for us, like we love seeing what are the bounds out there, what are the new technologies, and finding new applications. So I think that's where it's like it's a symbiotic collaboration where it's like we're both providing value to each other. And I think that's where good collaborations happen, is figure out what you can uniquely provide to the other team.
Again, I mean, a lot of this takes a lot of time, risk, and sometimes when you start some of this, you don't really know if there's going to be an end product. So if in your world of Ministry of Supply, how long is it from research to delivery of your first product?
Yeah, it can really vary. I think we really try to focus on this, what's called like an agile development process. And we really exercised it the past 2 years, particularly during the pandemic, and just trying to figure out how do we design, develop, and test products really quickly to get market feedback. So, sometimes materials take 2 years to develop to go to market. And other times, we can design, develop something in the course of 9 months. And it really depends like what the manufacturing limitations are, and then how much we leverage our partnerships, right? So like our intelligent heated jacket that when we first launched it, like that took 3 months to design, develop, test, and prototype the kind of initial version. And then we launched on a Kickstarter and we got market feedback, right? And we were able to use that to really help guide the development and kind of further development of that product. So yeah, I think that's there's no kind of like, we really try to focus away from almost like a traditional innovation funnel, which is like, here's our product technology at technology readiness level 7, and here's what's 8, but really just try to like push things through, and when there's kind of a market pull, that's when we really accelerate the development on that product.
And in all of those cases, sometimes you don't get to the end. How do you know when it's time to kill something? Because that a lot of people just continue tinkering, hoping that something would happen, which is great.
Yeah.
But sometimes you make a business and commercial call to kill something.
Yep.
What's the process you go through and say, okay, it's not going to work, let's just move on?
Yeah. It's a lot of times understanding the economics of production. It's understanding what is the biggest one is what's the consumer behavior right now. Has there been like the best technologies or innovation happens when there's both a novel technology but also a massive behavioral shift. And societally right now, that's like the biggest one right now is remote and hybrid work, right? And so any technology that we can provide right now that facilitates that will rise to the top, right? Because, for example, we've been making garments with stretch waistbands for years, and people never understood the value of it, right? Until all of a sudden they've been sitting at home and they've been wearing yoga pants or sweatpants, for example, and now they realize how big of a difference like having a comfortable pair of pants while you're sitting for hours can make a big difference, right? So I think it's especially coming from like an engineering technology background, we oftentimes think that innovation is about whether the technology is fully developed, but a lot of times it's about, is there that kind of consumer behavior, that societal shift, and that's really where you see that acceleration happen.
And there's a lot of technology coming out. We're looking at, I think you launched products with sort of a resurgence of knitting, really, with 3D printing, etc., on knit garments, which was used in jumpers and sweaters for years. And the flat knit technology came back, and you sort of jumped on the bandwagon really early for a retail brand. And do you feel that type of customization is the future in your business?
Yeah, when we think about apparel is like, it is right. Like we talk about extension of the body, and that like it is, as far as products go, there's such variation in SKUs and sizing, et cetera, that there's tremendous value for that, right? I think one of the things we've tracked has been the rise of rapid manufacturing, right? Which is, it's the corollary to rapid prototyping, right? Everyone's seen 3D printers and kind of the value that has for developing hard goods. But actually, what happens is 3D printers are fantastic for that, but there's a gap between the speed of prototyping with creating something that can be produced at a one-off level at scale, right? Particularly for hard goods. Traditional 3D printers are additive manufacturing techniques where you build them layer by layer up. And computerized knitting, for example, we like to say 3D print knit, but computerized knitting is actually the original additive manufacturing process, right? And that's what excites us, is that while a 3D printer is layering plastic on top of each other and hoping to fuse each layer together, that's always an area of lack of structural integrity. And that's actually what causes that kind of gap between rapid prototyping and rapid production. But what's really exciting about computerized knitting is that each layer is integrated to the layer before it. So you create something that's production ready, that's highly durable, that's indistinguishable for something that isn't made using a computerized knit process. And the value of computerized knitting is one, production, volume of one, but also the ability to control the composition, the three-dimensional structure and ergonomics of a garment pixel by pixel, right? Like you can think of a stitch as a pixel, and it's a totally different workflow. We spent a lot of time on computerized knitting. We have a grant with the Advanced Functional Fabrics Association of America to do research with MIT around this, and we think there's a massive opportunity around functional fabrics that have been not just have a mono material, but also have functionality built in them, like the ability to open up porosity when you go into a humid environment, for example.
And what is the one thing that in that area is still unsolved? Is it a mixing of materials? What is the one thing that in a flat knit or 3D printed apparel, what is the sort of the gap that you're trying to close?
Yeah. I actually think that what's really interesting to track with technologies is not so much what the capability is. Like you can look at megahertz over time, or you could look at how much does 1 gigahertz cost over time. And I actually think that real innovation is tracking that one is unit per, the cost per unit essentially, and how that drops. Solar panels, for example, the cost per kilowatt is 1/10 of what it was a decade ago. And in computerized knitting, for example, that's what we need to track, is actually, if you were to kind of, what we're tracking is what is the cost to knit a square unit of measure, like a square meter of fabric, right? And the reason why footwear has really stood out right now is because the cost to make a square meter of fabric is quite expensive. But the next best alternative for footwear is it's multiple layers being stitched together. But footwear requires much less volume than a sweater or a garment does, right? So we just don't see the kind of the economics working yet. We think that for computerized knitting to really work for things like t-shirts, for kind of full garments, that kind of cost frontier really needs to come down, because you're really paying for kind of the knitting of the entire material, and fundamentally it's I like to think of it as a reciprocating engine versus a turbine engine, right? Like a computerized knitting machine has this heavy mass that's going back and forth, and it creates this mechanical limitation to the production speed. You have a momentum that has to stop, turn around, and go back and forth. Whereas circular knitting, for example, is a little bit better. It's like a turbojet engine. It can go much much faster, and that's kind of the best application that we've seen of computerized knitting. But flatbed knitting, I think, where there's a big opportunity, is really, it's optimized for kind of smaller scale product. Our masks, for example, were a perfect application of that because the volume was quite small.
This region has been sort of volume-based manufacturing. When you take Bangladesh, India, everybody looks for the volume because that's very profitable. And you're working on the other side. You're really working for build to order type of situation. So how do you really, what advice could you tell the manufacturers in this region, the guys who are developing brands, how to get into this new world of build to order?
Yeah, I think built to order, like, I still haven't seen the consumer pull for it yet. Like, we're still seeing that the best application of computerized knitting is how do we create better functionality or comfort for the garment, because the user experience for figuring out what's your size is actually like very difficult. There are some 3D scanning technologies that maybe are getting better with, like, you know, phones that have LiDAR scanners, or, you know, kind of like photogrammetric scanning built into them. But that is something that we see that being a little bit far out. The value to a brand, though, is actually probably more on-demand production, which is focused on how do you do SKU management in a way that's really effective, right? That's a way that you can really allow yourself to say, like, hey, we're going to optimize our inventory so that we're not going to have, you know, obsolete sizes, you know, at the end of a season, and also we can backfill inventory in real time. You know, traditional cut and sew has this challenge, right? It's batch manufacturing. It's hard to predict unless you're in a stable category. It's very hard to predict, you know, size ranges, colors, etc. So I think, you know, for computerized and additive manufacturing, the real focus in the near term should be like optimization there, and make it so that you can optimize a brand's inventory, because you'll be able to sell that story better. And then as we nail that, we can go into built to order. But I think there's a front end part that needs to be, you know, solved for the consumer, which is how do I figure out my size? Yeah.
So if there was one problem you would love to throw out to the audience, what's the one thing that you're trying to solve that they can help you with?
Yeah, a big one for us is on the material side. We're a brand that we're climate neutral certified, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we use science to not just create higher performance materials, but also lower our carbon footprint. That's kind of, if we look at all of our sustainability initiatives, it all boils up to reducing our carbon emissions. You know, to date, functional materials have traditionally been, you know, petroleum based, but we're really trying to focus on how do we shift towards either recycled or plant-based or bio-based materials without sacrificing the performance, right? I think biomaterials are a really interesting place. You're starting to see that take off actually a lot in the kind of like bio leathers arena, something that we're tracking a lot, and basically providing, you know, vegetarian or vegan options in that space, right? In the case of, you know, polyester, for example, how can we use you know, renewable feedstocks, whether that's, you know, grass or wood, et cetera, that are actually carbon capture materials, because you're growing, you're using a fast growing material that doesn't use a lot of water. And then you're either repolymerizing that into something like viscose or tencel, et cetera, or you're using the sugars to create bioethanol, you know, polyethylene, essentially, down the line. Those are the challenges that we're really excited about right now. Is again using science. Like it's almost like the step change in performance that we got from a lot of the synthetic fibers has happened. It's now about how do we get that step change in carbon emissions and footprint, while maintaining super soft hand feel, breathability, moisture management, and ease of care.
So just moving on from product into this topic of retail. You had 6 stores, which were, you know, highly interactive stores.
Mm-hmm.
How have you managed through that, and how have you had to sort of shift your business model, and how you sell digitally versus in store during this COVID period?
Yeah, so we started online as a business, and we opened our first store in 2014, and so built our retail footprint, and we're in all the kind of like major cities in the U.S., primarily coastal plus Chicago. But during COVID, our retail locations are heavily driven by both domestic and international tourism. So throughout the summer, we reopened our stores, but we just found that, like, until that picks up, and in most locations that'll take probably another year before that traffic picks up. So we decided to close our retail locations. We did actually just reopen our Boston store, but we used that as an opportunity to really rethink what retail is going to look like. It's thinking about how can we be smart about inventory, using a kind of almost e-commerce first experience, which is the fact that we have a unified warehouse. And we have light inventory in store, but really trying to drive product education in store, fitting, etc. And so it's a different model. We're using our Boston location, which is like 2 doors down from our office here on Newbury Street, as a test bed, to test out the market, to test out how people are interacting with our products, interacting with our stores. And yeah, we're tracking it, and we're hoping. Traffic's picking up here in the US, which is exciting. It's definitely like there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And so we think in strong domestic markets, we can open up stores. And then the markets that do require some international tourism, will probably wait till next year.
I mean, you built your business on really comfort at work. And how do you sort of look at all of the elements of getting to work? Because as in the US, you're running for a taxi, you're running for the metro. So you have different elements you're really looking at. And you had to suddenly switch into, people working from home in their shorts on the computer. And how do you sort of switch your business model and say, okay, now I've got to think of how people can work from home, and what are the sort of products that you're really thinking about now for working from home?
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, our value prop has always been look comfortable but presentable, right? And that happened to manifest itself in dress shirts and blazers kind of in the last decade. But I laughed at shorts because one of the things that we noticed was short sales were up 3x year over year and to forecast last summer. And so it's definitely been, and on the flip side, our pants category is taking off right now because it's been a neglected part of the wardrobe for the past year. So the data shows what people's real behaviors are. Things we're really, we think we're poised to drive this category called work leisure. It's this idea of, it's almost, when we think of athleisure, but for the office, right? And wherever that is, right? It's acknowledging that people are, they're going to be working, maybe a couple days a week in office, maybe they're working fully remote, or they're kind of coming in a couple times for a couple hours in the day, right? But there's going to be a lot more transition between different environments, both home, the day, and other areas. And that's actually where our product stands out. Our products are most comfortable actually when you're going between places, and you have to look comfortable and presentable. So things we're tracking as active commuting. People aren't taking public transit as much right now, but they're opting to walk to work, particularly in urban environments, or they're biking to work, for example. And those are things that we're moisture management, having great four-way stretch, wrinkle resistance are absolutely key, but you still want to look presentable. I think what we've seen is everyone's kind of palette for buying yoga pants and joggers is tapped, and what they're really looking for now is products that look sharp, that they can feel confident in high definition and seeing people in person. So work leisure is definitely kind of the category we're looking at. Kind of micro trends we're seeing is like, or people are wearing their shirts untucked. They're not wearing belts, so they want stretch waistbands. They're preferring to wear sneakers over dress shoes. So like those are all things that we modified our products to look like. In August, when we kind of saw that, hey, like this isn't going to be resolved this year, what we actually did is we took some of our inventory, stateside inventory that was in our warehouse, and actually sent it to a manufacturer in New Jersey, just about 100 miles away, and actually had our pants refit to make them look good with sneakers, basically a tapered leg line, shorter crop, and we actually put in a elastic waistband, and we were able to turn that inventory over in about 2 weeks. And I think it's again going back to this like agile development and production process that enables that.
And how important is having manufacturing close to where you are a part of that? Because I know you do some work in Detroit or as well. So how is that more of an important factor for you?
I think it's about having like a diversity in your manufacturing supply chain. Like we need high volume manufacturers close to where our fabrics are made. A lot of our fabrics come from Japan, Taiwan, where we're doing a lot of kind of advanced performance materials. And so that's where we're going to find a lot of the expertise around the tailored garments. What we utilize a lot of our stateside production for, kind of, you know, Japan, Sri Lanka, US, is for computerized knitting, because that's where we find both the equipment but also the expertise there. So I think like that's kind of, it's a diverse mix. We did find that, you know, in the past year, that having at least the ability to do some local modification or production, like for masks or for inventory modifications, is key. Particularly as you know, sea shipping, air freight costs were up 4x year over year. Sea freight is, you know, we're seeing 6-week delays right now. It's definitely something where I think everyone's rethinking their supply chain.
You spoke about your masks, but you also started Science for Better.
Yeah.
You want to just share what you did with vaccine bracelets and why you did it?
Yeah. You know, our kind of brand pillar is that we believe we can use science to you know, solve challenges that people are having, both in their everyday lives and their product, but also societally. So, you know, we produce masks. There's been a big issue in the U.S. about STEM education, particularly for underrepresented minorities in the U.S. And so we created a STEM education kit all built around fabric and textile science that could be shipped to students' homes so they could have science classes while they're learning remote. And the Science for Better bracelet was really about kind of seeing the end of the pandemic, right? Is how do we actually provide this identification as way to say, like, I believe in science, I believe in vaccination, and you know, allow people to make their own choices, but to allow basically through the sales of this bracelet, we're providing funds for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is one of the leaders in vaccine education, particularly for children.
We spoke about the supply chain. How do you think the retail is going to change in the US and globally? Are people going to switch completely to online, or is the retail model still going to be different to what it is today? What are the changes you're seeing and contemplating through?
Yeah, I think a big part is going to be like a normalization, at least in terms of e-commerce, of like of speed. I mean, that's just been one of the big things from everyone's normalized around 1 or 2 day Amazon, right? So that's kind of nothing new there. But on the retail front, this was happening pre-COVID, but we kind of see it accelerating, which is that stores really need to have a value proposition, which is a human connection, right? Which is a real-time conversation and the ability to touch and feel a product. So that's what we're focusing our stores on. But again, like allowing the store to exist online, the online store to exist in store. So we have this program called the Hero, for example, that we work with, where if people want to chat with someone, they can actually have a video call, you know, real time, so like kind of like FaceTime basically, with one of our team members in our store, and they can see the product and they can chat at real time, right? And that's where we're seeing it's different than a like traditional call center or just chat, for example, right? So that's where the two support each other.
And you know, kudos to your brand. Extremely transparent. You're very open with where you manufacture, globally where you buy materials, and you continue that with, you know, the image that you're building with going zero in your organization, and also now you're looking at kinetic adaptive, which, you know, looking at adaptive clothing, which is a massive need. And just we close up. We've got a couple of minutes. Do you want to talk about what you're doing and all of the supports that you're giving different charities as well in the US?
Yeah. For Science for Better, like we have kind of 3 pillars of where we really focus. You know, first is workforce readiness. So you know, we create clothes for people when they're working, right? And so last year, for example, and we've been doing this for 7 years, is our program that's called Starter Kits, where we give a complete head to toe outfit for someone who's in need, searching for a job, particularly, you know, during the pandemic. That was incredibly important, as there's been a lot of fluctuations in the job market. So that's we've provide over $250,000 worth of product to people in need there, working with organizations like the International Rescue Commission in New York and organizations here in Boston as well. The other pillar that we have is STEM education. We really believe that it's what makes this brand. We're rooted in science, but we don't think it's a singular profession, but it's a mentality. It's a understanding and appreciation for science that I think has risen to the public consciousness in the past year. And that's something that we really believe in. So we've partnered with organizations like BJICA, which is a Boston-based public education program that focuses on digital fabrication skills and maker skills. So they have a workshop here in Boston that students have come over for past several summers and school vacations and seen our 3D print store, our machine store. They learn about digital fabrication. And we wanted to continue this year. And so we created that STEM education kit we call the MLabs kit that we gave out this year. And then the third pillar is climate science and climate action. So we're climate neutral certified as a brand, but we really try to focus on not only how do we eliminate and reduce our carbon footprint, but really help other brands understand how they can go through the carbon accounting process and understand what are the choices that they can make in terms of materials and manufacturing that reduce their footprint. So we've published a lot of content around this. So there's two routes, right? There's either like IP or there's open source, and we're very much in the kind of open source mentality.
Gihan, I know you have to go. Thank you very much for taking time and speaking to South Asia. We wish you all the best and keep doing what you do. And we look forward to hosting you in Sri Lanka very soon.
Yeah.
And with that, thank you very much. I just want to say thank you to Hatch Sri Lanka, Hatch Pakistan, BYLC Ventures in Bangladesh, Seed Ventures in Pakistan, ProPakistani as well. And next week we have Gihan Chu, who has invested in over 180 cryptocurrency companies, and we're going to talk about crypto next week. So thank you very much again, Gihan, and wish you have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.